Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first session here on track A to the Data Summit. Today, we are talking about water and how to use data to respond to some of the challenges we're facing. We have 4 speakers, so we're gonna have a great presentation. I wanna introduce all 4 of them just briefly, and then I'll pass it on to them, which then they'll take on. We'll go through about 25-minute presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A after that. So if you have any questions, make sure to post them in the chat. Just a few notes on our virtual platform. You see the chat window to the right of the video player. You can chat along with attendees about what you're hearing and seeing in this session or in the conference in general. And you can post the questions for the presenters. We'll take those questions, we'll pass them on, and then we'll try to go through as many as possible. If you note any technical issues, either with the stream, the chat, or really anything else, just let us know. You can also join the networking area after the presentation, where you'll find some of the speakers and you can continue the conversation. So for today's presentation, we have 4 speakers. The first one is Kayla Anderson. Kayla Anderson is a senior at the University of California, Berkeley, studying civil and environmental engineering with a focus on water quality and access. Next, we have J. Carl Ganter, and he's the co-founder and the managing director of Circle of Blue, the internationally recognized center for original frontline reporting, research, and analysis on water resource issues and the water, food, energy, climate nexus. Next, we have Joe Warburton. He is Visblip's Industry Solutions Director and previously was the Qlik Healthcare Industry Solutions Director for the Americas. And finally, we have Julie Kay. She is the VP Sustainability and Executive Director of Qlik.org at Qlik. Ms. Kay leads the organization's program on global sustainability internally and focuses efforts on multi-sectoral collaborations to effectively serve our planet and the inclusion and well-being of all citizens everywhere. With that being said, let's jump into the presentation itself.
Hello, and welcome to our session entitled, "The Blue Planet is Thirsty: Responding to Global Water Challenges with Data and Insight." I'm Julie Kay, the Vice President of Sustainability and DE&I at Qlik, and joining me today are Carl Ganter and Kayla Anderson from Circle of Blue and Joe Warbington from Visblip. Firstly, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Qlik, the organization behind all of these great data and analytics examples that you're going to see later in the presentation. Qlik is a company that was originally founded in Sweden and is now based just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, servicing over 50,000 customers with thousands of partners and leading the industry with regards to software and technology, advancing data for business value. Qlik services companies of all shapes and sizes and industries. And what we do in particularly is help organizations turn data into business value. How do we do it? We focus on delivering an end-to-end platform all the way from integrating data sources into a data analytics engine and delivering visualizations and endless ways in which that data can be used and turned into actionable intelligence. Starting with data integration, our platform is cloud-based and can connect with many different data sources within an organization to bring that data into an environment that is governed and managed and prepare that data for analytics. As a third-generation BI tool, Qlik focuses on unique capabilities to allow business users access into that information and turn it into real value to drive better decision-making. And encapsulating all of that is included a data literacy as a service integration so that customers and partners can leverage this knowledge and be better informed with regards to how they can power their businesses with data. Customers choose Qlik because we are the best end-to-end platform taking data from raw to ready and enabling business users to use that data to make better decisions as they go forward in their own specific environment. Qlik goes to the next level. We're all about taking data and turning it into action. And we're very proud of the example that we're going to talk about here in today's session. The Qlik Sustainability Program encapsulates years of experience with working with organizations around the globe on their efforts to be a more sustainable, better to the environment, and improve health outcomes for citizens everywhere. Our sustainability mission is to not only be a sustainable organization ourselves, but to serve other organizations with the power of our data analytics platform so that better decisions can be made around many of our global challenges. This brings us to today's presentation. Qlik has partnered with Circle of Blue for over 10 years. Circle of Blue, which you're going to hear about in a second, is a phenomenal organization based out of Michigan in the United States that focuses on the most demanding crisis of our time, and that is the global water crisis. Now you're going to hear from Carl Ganter, the president of Circle of Blue, who's going to talk about the challenges and also supported by several different applications built in Qlik to answer those challenges and help find solutions for a more sustainable environment going forward. Carl?
Well, thanks so much, Julie. We have an amazing partnership with Qlik that helps us and our audience around the world better understand our global water crises. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to take you to the front lines and talk about how we're working to solve some wicked problems with data and insights. And yes, according to the Harvard Business Review, a wicked problem has many causes, morphs constantly, and has no correct answer. But it can be tamed with the right approach. So we're going to hear from Joe Warbington from VizLib and Kayla Anderson from Circle of Blue. And we'll get to your questions, so please put them in the chat. But first, as a journalist and former National Geographic and Time magazine photographer, let me take you to the front lines and share some of the faces and the places for context behind the numbers. Because it's profound what we do to get water. We build canals, and we dam rivers, and we pump wells. But, Houston, we have a problem. Our blue planet is thirsty. For multiple years in a row, the World Economic Forum has ranked water crises among the world's top 5 greatest threats. That's greater than weapons of mass destruction, even greater than pandemics. So there's good reason for the ranking, and most of the numbers are getting worse. Dozens of cities worldwide face what a clever headline writer in Cape Town called Day Zero. That's the day when the reservoirs, the wells, and the taps could go dry. And yes, Miami and London are on the list. And here I photographed crews laying a private water pipeline in Jakarta. Some 70% of freshwater use is consumed by agriculture, growing food for a growing and hungry population. And in many cities worldwide, many people can't afford to pay for even the most basic water service. While I was photographing Rebecca Fritz in her home in Detroit, the postman came. He brought her water bill, $1,400. It's a bill that she can't afford to pay. At Circle of Blue, we reported this year that Chicago is owed nearly $500 million in overdue water bills. Those are hidden numbers that are putting pressure on budgets and system investments. And then there's climate change. It's the force multiplier. Climate is water. And here's a quote that's especially appropriate. If climate change is the shark, water is the teeth. Warmer temperatures, floods, and droughts are stressing food and energy security and political stability. So indeed, the future is here ahead of schedule. If you look closely, you can count hundreds of water tanks on these buildings in Delhi. So I'm a reporter, and these stories can't be told remotely. It's hard to identify with statistics, so we use a secret process we call IWT. I was there.
It's a typical morning as Delhi awakens to its usual chaos, its legendary traffic jams and vendors on the street, and beggars, faces longingly pressed against car windows, selling flowers. But like many of the world's urban centers, Delhi is thirsty, even parched. As the third largest population center in the world, its 25 million people need water, and lots of it just to survive. On this day, I want to learn more about how millions of people live literally bucket to bucket, not necessarily knowing when and if their water will come. So I take my camera to the neighborhood of Sangram Vihar, one of the city's countless informal poor communities where every drop does count. On this summer day, on a street made muddy by leaking sewage pipes, we come across women who have gathered to fill buckets and barrels from a water truck as it makes its delivery. They pay for the tanker to deliver water because the city's connections aren't reliable, are unsafe, or aren't even available at all. As the truck leaves, there's smiles of relief on this steamy day. While they may or may not have a toilet, they can take comfort in knowing that their families will have water to drink and to wash with in the week ahead.
So the World Bank estimates that half of the world's population will live in water-stressed regions by 2025. That's in less than 5 years. This is a significant migration trigger. Here in Sao Paulo, people who live in these favelas of Portolina are farmers who have moved to the city because their crops have failed due to drought. I found the irony especially poignant. The muddy alleys were named for the villages they left behind. And there's no doubt that we're on the verge of a data revolution for our planet. And yet we make assumptions that the data is always available or in context. This is the data center for the Punjab Department of Irrigation. I was careful not to wake up the servers. Guys, that's supposed to be a data joke. But we also have an era of communications and empowerment that can lead to transparency and accountability. This man in Hyderabad showed me the river that flows past his home, and sometimes the foam rises up to his front door. If he only knew who to send the pictures to. So I have to say the soles of my shoes fell off a few days after taking these pictures. And finally, there's nothing more timely or urgent than the pandemic. So we wanted to look at the impacts of the pandemic on water, sanitation, and hygiene around the world. Through our reporting and data analysis, we teased out some powerful and unusual findings. In fact, we co-hosted a special session just this morning with the Wilson Center and the Hilton Foundation about the state of water, sanitation, and hygiene around the world. So we're going to turn to our data nuts on this adventure. And I don't know if there's a superhero term for Qlik users. If you've got one, put that in the chat too. So Joe's going to show us how we're using Qlik to bring new critical insights to the water and sanitation challenges around the world in this pandemic era.
Perfect. Thanks, Carl. And thanks, Julie. It's great to be working with Qlik again. I spent a couple of years there working closely with her team on the Change Our World program and familiar with Circle of Blue. So in the last year, just getting to work with you all again has been really great. So I'm going to be taking you through a couple applications today with Kayla. This first one, as Carl mentioned, is around WASH, and that's the water, sanitation, and hygiene, and as it relates to COVID. So there's a rich set of data that this application that Deloitte built pulls together, and that comes from the WHO and the World Bank. So what we see here is the total number of COVID cases up until a certain date. But really interestingly is how this might compare with different countries and their rankings for high, medium, and low access to water. So in a recent story by Circle of Blue, they focused in on Kenya, which we'll zoom in here, is under a medium kind of level from the World Bank for medium access to water. And as I drill into Kenya, we can see their COVID cases, we can see the number of tests that they have, and for their population, how many people have no access to water. They're close to 33%, a third of people. Limited water, also 9%. So, upwards of 42% or so of the population has very limited access to water. And what we see on the chart is the cases for Kenya as they've grown over the course of the pandemic. There's always issues with reporting on cases in the data there, but actually the data on the tests is fairly good. And we see in blue, that's the number of people that have access to basic water. They're actually getting more tests than those that have medium or low access to water. And this is a really bad issue, of course. Kenya's done some interesting things we read about. and heard from Circle of Blue, where they're not turning off water for people, even though they can't pay their bills, that more people are now in poverty. And this is what the pandemic has brought to light. So for organizations and the WHO and leading bodies around the world, you can use a dashboard like this with all of this data to compare and contrast how COVID is impacting water and sanitation programs. There are a number of other sheets available with more data that break down into the other things, but for now we'll stick with the water dashboard. Carl?
Thanks, Joe. So we're based in Michigan, and it's the heart of the Great Lakes, but these lakes have issues, lake level swings and temperature fluctuations, but we're using Qlik to help our readers, scientists, and shoreline property owners follow the trends more closely. So I'm going to hand it over to Kayla Anderson at Circle of Blue, who's going to show you more about how we're providing insights about some 20% of the world's fresh water.
Thanks, Carl, and thank you, Joe, for presenting the COVID and WASH dashboard. So my name is Kayla. I have been participating in Circle of Blue through an internship for the past about 8 to 9 months, and it's been a really great experience. One of the main projects I have had the opportunity to work on is working with Great Lakes water level and surface temperature data to build this dashboard through Qlik. Really what we're looking at here is lake levels have been changing and lake temperatures have also been fluctuating. And we really want to see what type of stories we can pull out of that using this data. Right here, we are pulling from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's sensors that they have located around the Great Lakes. This is first page is just a bit of an overview, and we can look a little bit deeper. Let's take a look at Lake Superior to start. As you can see here, this is primarily used for people, policymakers, and the public that live around the lake and are curious about their current lake levels and also the conditions of the lake they're living on. This can impact wildlife and also kind of tell the story of climate change over the past couple decades. First off, we can see here you have your daily averages that are reported as of today at Lake Superior. Say you live along the upper edge of Michigan and you want to know that exact lake level at your nearest station reporting, the map is really great for checking that. Oh, look, Point Iroquois has 602 feet above the International Great Lakes Datum. And down here in this distribution plot, you can see how that station that's closest to you compares with other reporting stations in the Lake Superior region. It's good for geographic, knowing what's going on near that location that you're interested in, and also data literacy, seeing the distribution of water level that we can pull. What we also can see here is how lake levels fluctuate over a 24-hour period. Again, pulling over the last 24 hours from these NOAA sensors that are publicly available. All right, so that is today's current lake levels, and what we really want to do is contextualize that in the history of Lake Superior lake levels. So this next graph is going to show distribution over the past 100 years of yearly average lake levels. As you can see, it's been fluctuating a lot quicker in the last 20 or so years. And recently a story has been published through Circle of Blue and our Great Lakes Collaborative that's highlighted this fluctuation and attributed it to climate change. And so we're seeing as lake levels fluctuate, how does that change the shoreline, and how does that impact policymakers and the public that want to be concerned about property values and also flood insurance. And along with that, we have overlaid today's lake level, so what you just saw on that last page in red, and in comparison with yearly lake averages. All right. And the other half of the story that we want to talk about is changing lake water temperatures. This data is pulled from a collaboration between NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Canadian Wildlife and Fisheries. So they have been recording lake monthly temperatures for the past 25 years, displayed here in this heat map. Heat maps I have found are a really great way to show changes in data that might otherwise be missed in just a straight table. As you can see over in the winter months, lake levels have been getting warmer and warmer at a more higher frequency, whereas there would be stretches of 2 to 3 years with lower winter temperatures. Now we're seeing more frequent high winter temperatures in Lake Superior. And again, we have the current water temperature recorded at the lake. It's currently May. This is about 45 degrees. Let's see, how does that compare to the average in May last year? Pulling over here, that's about 38 degrees. So we are a little bit warmer than has been averagely reported in the past. Yeah, so pretty much this is just a snapshot of what this dashboard and this data can really do to inform people that are living in the Great Lakes area and policymakers, anyone that's really concerned about changing lake conditions, how it's going to impact the local ecosystem and also shoreline conditions.
Thanks so much, Kayla. On the other side of too much water is those who have too little or can't afford their water bills. So remember Rebecca Fritz in Detroit, and remember her water bill. So water is an access issue. It's a social justice issue. So we turned again to Joe and to Qlik to make the numbers come alive. Hey, Joe.
Thanks, Carl. So what we have here is another chance for us to blend together different data sources, and Qlik is really good with that. So it's some hand-collected data from one of the journalists at the reporters at Circle of Blue, Brett, and he's taken water debt data, which is a combination of both water and sewer debt, and also has demographics data around these various zip codes that make up the metropolitan Detroit area. I actually used to live about an hour away from Detroit. My family currently lives near one of these bubbles on the map. And so it's something that's actually very close to home for me. But if we take a look at these different zip codes, the purple bars show us the percent in poverty for these various communities. So you have some down here in this relatively affluent area inside Metro Detroit over here. And the green tick bars that you see here are the amount of average water debt that these particular communities might have. It's a bit of a two-sided story. It just depends on kind of where you're at and what type of bills have been piling up perhaps, or if you've had a leak, which happens in the winters in Michigan, and if you don't catch it, you might have something big. So if we look at Rebecca Fritz, she's in the 48206, we're able to click on her particular zip code. All of the visualizations update. We kind of zoom in into the very center of her neighborhood here, and we see how many people are in poverty, what the average water bill is, sewer plus water per household. We see it's about $502. You can kind of see this, the total balance for this entire community that was hand collected is like $1.8 million in sewer and 750 or so, $750,000 in water balance. But the demographics also tell an interesting story. You can see these stacked up and see the demographics. 89% of folks in this particular zip code are Black. A very different story perhaps for this one over here, but everybody is experiencing water debt at some particular level. So this is able to be used by community members. You can see where you are, where you live on the map. These particular dots are all clickable, but you can also at the city level or the municipality make sure that you're fair and balanced with the bills that are piling up for your constituents. And this type of data bringing together is a really great way to show this particular social justice, kind of water justice view of the data, and how water is still very important and is becoming a really interesting thing, especially with the pandemic and people not being paid even more water bills and what happens.
So thanks, Joe. Well, stay right there because we've got one more for you. Remember the Great Freeze in Texas? Well, we anticipated potential problems months in advance and sent our senior editor to tease out the story and bring home the data.
I'm Keith Schneider, Senior Editor and Chief Correspondent at Circle of Blue.
This project is a classic Circle of Blue, arrive, do the reporting, do the analysis in a place that's important on the planet for its economy, certainly its energy infrastructure and economy, and for water. We have helped put that story on the planet. We have changed the narrative about water. And that narrative is changing in the United States. So let's apply it to Texas. The dry years in Texas are not the vulnerable years. They're not the dangerous years. It's the wet years in Texas that are the dangerous years, because Texans forget that they have droughts, deep, deep, terrible droughts regularly that cause panic there. They know that also that they are in regimes of torturous meteorological panic from floods, and storms, right? And droughts, which are becoming more numerous, becoming more urgent, and becoming deeper and more dangerous.
And Joe's set to take us behind the scenes to the data that tells the story of water, Texas.
Perfect. So another interesting kind of story here we pulled together with the data from Circle of Blue into an interactive dashboard. What we see here is the demand for water versus the supply of water in these various communities, whether the city, counties, or municipalities. We see that on the map where these particular communities are located. Of course, we can zoom in. The size of the dot giving us some indication of the demand over the supply. And what we see is a decades-long study that, you know, we're in a particular dire situation, even just less than a decade out. We see Houston, San Antonio, Travis County, all increasing their demand over the supply of water. And what's nice is that we've tied this to the various stories. So, and a multi-part series that Circle of Blue has, you can click on story 1. You can see the various counties and cities that we're talking about in the stories, and even link directly out to when it rains, Texas forgets drought and worsens water scarcity. And this type of interaction between the dashboard, we're going to launch over to the actual article that's part of the series, gives us the ability to interact with the data and the story. And I thought this was a really interesting use of the data to give us a way to jump through things where people can start in an article and maybe jump back into the data and compare and contrast these particular counties, or clear everything and see the full scale view of all these various municipalities and cities and their demand that they have for water. And that's what we have with this application.
So that's just a quick tour of our thirsty world, and we believe and have demonstrated through our long relationship with Qlik that when data comes alive in context, it makes a difference for us and the planet. Data's a lot like water. Where it flows and when we understand it, we thrive, and we really can't wait to share more. But let's come back to group and get right to your questions.
Thank you. So all the speakers, you can unmute and come back to video if you like. And I do have a few initial questions here that we can go over the next 10 minutes. So let me just share them with you, and you can tackle them in any order you want. So first question, what are some of the challenges that you see in bringing data literacy to some of the areas that you mentioned specifically? You talk about Sao Paulo and India. Do you see some challenges in working with teams that are based there that may not have the same data literacy that you might expect somewhere like the United States or Canada?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks. That's a great question too. And I showed a picture, and I love that scene because in Punjab, India, the data center looked like a scene out of Indiana Jones, that closing scene, where literally the documents were stacked so high that the ones on the bottom were turning to dust. So one of the big challenges that we have, and this is in the US and it's in the developing world and the developed world, is we make a lot of assumptions about data. And oftentimes we come at it from the wrong direction. So for example, in India, and our work in India, we literally went and sat down. We went to the various groundwater officials. We defined what data sets we needed. And we brought our USB drives with us. And we literally sat down and had multiple cups of tea and got the data in person and the context. In the US, we're getting better at this, and the tools are getting better from Qlik, particularly as far as normalizing data. But we have decades of data, say groundwater data, that oftentimes is in different formats, or the cells don't line up. It is not just a click away. And so Qlik being C-L-I-C-K. But it truly is a complicated issue. But when we're able to crack that that data nugget, we're able to see insights that we could never have even imagined. I mean, here Joe showed the water sanitation and hygiene piece. The session we ran this morning, opened by Ambassador Green and hosted by the Wilson Center, we were able to show that water and sanitation, though, is a grand global challenge. And you saw some pictures. You saw the Sao Paulo pictures, which is heartbreaking, what people live in. But these challenges, when the data comes alive, we can actually spot the trends and course correct. And what we were able to reveal is that even though we have a grand challenge in water, sanitation, and hygiene, that some of the most respected institutions and organizations on the planet are investing billions of dollars, it's not a losing battle, which many people assume. The data shows us that actually we are making remarkable progress. And so that's just a taste of some of the challenges we have, but to capture that data and then put it in actionable context. And the last little point I would say is that it often helps to come in with a sense of humility when trying to solve these data problems, because if you come at it from let's capture all the data and let AI sort it out. I mean, you can see a Hollywood producer saying that. But if you actually start with what kind of questions do we need to answer and what kind of questions could we answer and reverse engineer that, then you get a really effective really effective insights, and you're able to build a much more efficient platform.
Great, perfect, thank you. We have another question here for Mary D. How do you measure the impact of the data that you found?
Well, maybe if he wants to chime in here, but measuring the actual impact is we see, who uses it and what kind of decisions are they able to make. And again, I'll go back to our perhaps the Detroit and water pricing. And so there's a lot of talk, of course, about social justice issues. Also, one of the big issues around the world is environmental justice and equity. And so here we have in the nation, we have, and then COVID on top, but we have municipalities that are, they have bills to pay, they deliver water, and they take our dirty water away. That's a cost. And so how could we map that? So for the past 11 or 12 years, we've been mapping water pricing around the nation and using Qlik to make that data come alive. That data has been used even by Vice President Harris. It's been used in various congressional reports. That data teased out of Qlik dashboards that were able to show either trends or, as Joe indicated, disparities, particularly in communities like in Detroit. Also, Chicago. I think I mentioned also that Chicago, they're behind in almost $500 million in overdue bills. That affects how a municipality actually invests. And when we're able to reveal and make those trends, geolocate, make them come alive, that leads to much better, well, first off, it leads to insights and epiphanies, and then it leads to much better decisions. And maybe, Joe or Julie or Kayla wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, Carol, I think you said it perfectly. And, as we see in the news today, there's great attention being placed on, in particular in the United States, on infrastructure. And what Carl has done with combining the data story along with the story about its impacts, the water infrastructure, the aging infrastructure, the lack of water, the water pricing and all of that. By combining those two things, you take this very kind of this concept that gets talked about in the news and discussed on all of the television channels and all that about the infrastructure bill and the amount of money that's being spent. It brings it actually into context, and it actually then can help prioritize how that spending could occur and what impacts can be made on the lives of citizens, obviously not only in the US, but around the world.
Okay, great. Let's see if we have time for one more question. What can an average corporation do to help the water crisis, maybe directly or indirectly?
That's another great. These are great questions. So for when people ask me individually, yeah, you can take a shorter shower. Good for you. Use a little bit less water, right? But for companies and for people, the bottom line, and Julie basically said too, we have a big infrastructure potential investments and debates in the U.S. And that is to actually get involved in these discussions and get involved with the data so that you have the backing, but also understand the context. And so for companies, in order to be involved, there are some 3,000 companies around the world that have already, and these are major brands, that have identified and indicated that they have significant water risks to their bottom line. And this is to their supply chains, this is to their employees, this is to their license to operate, this is to even cooling data centers. If you're serving data, you need lots of water to cool your data centers. And so the companies are waking up to those risks, and you're seeing companies like, even companies like Microsoft and the big cloud companies are stepping up with big initiatives around water. Now, what's new is that, yes, we're going to use a little bit less water to cool our data centers or to, manufacture our Coca-Cola or something. But what they're seeing too is they're making commitments to policy. Now that's new. You're seeing more corporate activism, if you want to call it that, because it's in their self-interest. It's their shareholders are demanding it because of ESG, environment, social, and governance requirements. But they're stepping up for that and to play a role in the policy. And what do you need? You need two things for policy to be successful. One is you need the data to support it. And you've got to be able to understand the data, which is what we do with Qlik. And you got to be able to see yourself and put other people in that picture, for, as Julie mentioned, for the context. And so we're seeing more companies step up with actively participating in policy and bringing true data experts and context experts with them to the conversations.
Yeah, and I'll add on that too, Carl. Working with Julie over the years, I was very fortunate at Qlik to join what we call a CSR learner trip. And this speaks to, Carl, your point about going there and seeing something with your own eyes. And you experienced that. I had a chance to travel with Qlik with a small pack of people to go to Madagascar and see just the pollution that they have in their waterways, all of the sickness and the health issues that are coming from that, washing their dishes and food in this river that would make anybody sick if you were to go there for the first time. They've kind of built up some immunity, I guess, to it of sorts. But I saw it with my own eyes and walked away and left that trip. And it's a changing experience. And I think the companies that have those types of programs where you can get involved with nonprofits and NGOs like Circle of Blue just opens the eyes to more people, and you feel a bit more engaged, and you want to help out, you want to pitch in. And I think this is something that a lot of corporations should look to, and the Qlik.org that Julie's a part of is just, it's been a fun part. It was my favorite part of working at Qlik was having that program available.
Great. So I think we'll end it there with just a couple minutes to the end time. Any final comments from any of the speakers before we hop off?
I always turn to Julie, but I'll jump in. First, building relationships. Circle of Blue is a nonprofit. We're a nonprofit news organization. So our partnerships are absolutely key to what we do. And we've been partnered with Qlik for, well over 10 years, more than a decade. And we've done some really exciting things, and we're just at the tip of this big change. And so that's where I think, stepping up for this intense global transformation we're part of, for environment, social, these other pieces. Yes, the future will be digitized, but we need to put it in context.
Yeah, and I just like to say, thank you, Joe, Kayla, Carl. It's been great partnering with you all for the past several years. And if anyone's interested in kind of learning more about the ways in which Qlik supports nonprofits, supports causes, with our technology and the use of data, please feel free to reach out to us via the contact information in this session and/or at qlik.org.
Great. All right, everyone, we'll finish this session. Thank you again to all the speakers for taking time to share the insights. Up next in our track is data migration. So stick around for that. There's also a networking area in the virtual conference that we have set up here where you can meet other speakers. So also be sure to check that out. And we'll be back here in about 20 minutes for the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Take care.